Welcome to today's MOOC lecture. Today our topic of discussion is rights and obligations. And this is one of the major area of political theory or political philosophy. In today's lecture, for the purpose of understanding, we have arranged it into several parts. In the first part, we will briefly trace the emergence of the concept of rights in political theory. Then we will deal with the definition and meaning of rights and different types of rights, or what can be said the classification of rights. Then in the next section, we will deal with the meaning and nature of obligation. And in the last and final section, we will deal with the differences and interrelationships between rights and obligations. At the very outset, let us make it very clear that there are various theories of rights as well as theories of obligations. But in today's lecture, we will not go into the details of those theories because that needs a separate lecture to deal with. So we will just mention about those theories. And this concept of right, that is nowadays quite familiar in the common parlance as well as in political discourse. This concept of rights is closely intertwined with the concept of democracy. In the course of our discussion, we will again come back to this point. Now, tracing the legacy of the rights or the concept of rights in political philosophy, we can first find that in the Greek philosophy, in the works of Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek philosophers. In the Greek city-states, the right, one of the major rights, was considered as the right to participate in the political process of the city-states. But we have to remember that this right was very limited or restricted in nature. Because the Greek city-state was basically a slave society, and almost 1/3 of the population were slaves, the slaves did not have any right to participate in the process of the working of the city-states. The foreigners were also debarred from this right. So this was a right enjoyed by a very small minority of the population. Then after the Greek period, during feudalism, this right, this concept of right, was basically treated as a right to have property, to own property, to possess land. And this right also was not enjoyed by all the individuals as being individuals or human beings. This right was enjoyed only by, again, a section of the population, that is the feudal lords, the owners of lands. So in feudalism also this was a restricted right, and right meant mainly the right to have property, to own property or to possess property. The concept of right in its modern sense that basically emerged during the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe. First, through the contribution of the social contract theories, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. As I have told in the beginning, I am not going into the details of those theories. Another very important concept was the concept of natural rights. The theorists of natural rights, they argued that natural rights are a gift of God or a gift from nature to every human being. And the state is the guardian of these rights. State is not the provider or creator of these rights. And to deprive the human beings of such rights is therefore morally wrong. The state or government is obliged to protect and uphold these rights of the individual. And if a government does not, it acts immorally. One of the most articulate early exponent of this idea of natural rights was the famous political philosopher John Locke. Locke, in his work True Treatise on Government, published in 1690, identified life, liberty, and property as the three basic and natural rights. 86 years later, after John Locke, Thomas Jefferson wrote these principles into the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. Jefferson was one of the major contributors in this historic document. And he mentioned life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as the three natural rights. Now we will come to the second part of our discussion, that is the definition of rights, what is meant by rights, and the nature of rights, as has been discussed in political theory or political philosophy. A right can be defined as an entitlement to have or do something. That means that individual is entitled to perform certain things. Harold J. Lasky, one of the noted political theorists, observed in his famous book, Principles of Social and Political Theory, that, I quote, rights, in fact, are those conditions of social life without which no man can seek, in general, to be himself at his best, unquote. That means what Lasky wanted to mean is that rights are certain opportunities, certain requirements of the individual in a society which they need for their flourishment as a human being. Now, rights in any full sense of the term are never rights unless they are recognized by the state. And herein comes the relationship between the state, the citizens, and also the relationship between rights and democracy. Because it is only in a democratic state that the political authority or the state or the government ensures and guarantees the rights of the individual. Rights can be seen as the basic condition of man's good life, which should be recognized as such by the legal code of the state. That means, unless the state or the government guarantees the rights, cannot be rights in the true sense of the term. Rights can be only obtained in a democratic state where liberty and equality coexist. So, as we have mentioned in the beginning, all these concepts are closely interrelated with one another. The concept of rights, democracy, liberty, equality, and so on. Rights allow people to be aware of what they are entitled to do in society and at the same time what they are not entitled to do. In different societies and cultures, however, the rights varies, and this variation is backed up by social, ethical, moral, or legal boundaries. Say, for example, in some society or in some country, the right to kill oneself, which is called the right to euthanasia, that is guaranteed. In other societies, it is not. In some societies, the right to prostitution is guaranteed. In some other societies, it is not. So it is the cultural background, the history, the social norms, values, which determine the variations between rights from one society to another. But at the same time, there are rights which are enjoyed by human beings irrespective of any caste, class, sex, ethnicity, religion, nationality, and so on. These rights are called the human rights. So this is also again a major concept regarding the rights. We are not going into the details of discussion about what human rights are. The basic point regarding human rights are that those rights are universal in nature, enjoyed by all the human beings throughout the world simply because they are human beings. Now we will come to the discussion of classification of rights. Broadly speaking, rights can be classified into two types: moral rights and legal rights. Moral rights depend on man's ethical awareness and conscience. They are those claims which are based on the moral code of the community. Say, for example, a wife has a moral right to be sympathetically treated by her husband. A teacher has a moral claim to be respectfully treated by his students, and so on. Such rights, however, are not sanctioned or guaranteed by the legal framework of the state. They are not enforceable in the law courts. They are sanctioned by the prevalent morality of the society. The examples we have just mentioned, if an individual or somebody does not perform that duty, he or she cannot be prosecuted in the courts. That is, there is no legal sanction behind these rights. These rights are important in society, but the guarantee of these rights depend basically on the morality of the individual, on the moral code of the society or the community. Legal rights are those which are sanctioned and guaranteed by the state through its legal system. These are enforceable in the courts of law. Say, for example, the right of life of the individual, right to freedom of speech, right to freedom of expression. If these rights are violated, or an individual cannot enjoy these rights, the individual can seek protection in the law courts or from the judiciary. So these are legally sanctioned. Legal rights, again, can be broadly divided into two categories: civil rights and political rights. Civil rights are those privileges in the absence of which a person cannot enjoy a decent civic life. the mental and spiritual development of the individual is possible through the enjoyment of these rights. Now, this broad category of civil rights also includes various kinds of rights, say for example, social rights, economic rights, cultural rights, and so on. Some have made these elaborate classifications also. We here include all these rights under the category of civil rights. For example, right to freedom of expression, right to form association, right to education, right to health care, right to work, right to have property, so on and so forth. So all these come within the category of civil rights broadly. Political rights are those privileges recognized by the state that ensures the participation of the citizens in the political process. And this is a very important right so far as a democratic political system is concerned. The examples of political rights include the right to vote, the right to contest in an election, the right to hold public office, etc. In a democracy, through the exercise of political rights, the people determine the choice of government. Remembering that classical example of Abraham Lincoln, that democracy is a government for the people, of the people, and by the people. It is the people who, through the electoral process, institute the government of their choice. So this right to vote and right to stand in an election as a candidate and so on are very important political rights which determine the choice of government in a democracy. Political rights are significant also in the sense that the quality of a government considerably depends upon how these rights are exercised. Now, it is often told in the discussion of democracy and the theories of democracy that it depends upon the quality of the citizens and how they are successfully enjoying these political rights, that what kind of a government they will have. So from that point of view also, these rights are very important because these determine the quality of government that is constituted in a democracy by the people. So these are briefly the meaning of rights and the various kinds of rights or classification of rights. Now we will come to the next part of our discussion, that is the meaning of obligation and the nature of obligation. An obligation can be defined as something that one must do because of a law, necessity, or because it is their duty. It is a requirement or a duty to act in a particular way. Now we should mention one thing here, that obligation and duty, these two terms have been used interchangeably. We will also do the same thing. Obligations are demands made upon individuals, society, or government to fulfill and honor the rights of others. This will be clear further when we will discuss the interrelationship between rights and obligations. Obligations also can be broadly classified into two categories: legal obligation and moral obligation. Legal obligations are those that have become formal statements of law. Those are enforceable by the courts and backed up by penalties. For example, the individuals in society, they are required to pay taxes. It is a legal obligation. They are required to obey traffic rules while driving on the road. This is also a legal obligation because the violation of these duties or rights can lead to penalties by the state or the government. And these are enforceable also by the law courts. Moral obligations are those obligations which are not legally sanctioned, but they are based upon moral or ethical principles, usually not enforceable by law. Say, for example, to speak the truth, to help the people who are in need, caring aged parents, pay respect to seniors. All these are moral obligations or moral duties to be performed by the citizens, by the individuals. But here, if an individual does not perform these duties, say, for example, if an individual does not take care of his aged parents, he cannot be prosecuted in the court of law. He can be criticized by the others in the society on moral grounds, but he cannot be prosecuted legally. So these obligations or duties are morally sanctioned, not legally guaranteed. Now we will come to the final section of our discussion today, that is the differences as well as the interrelationships between rights and obligations. The key difference between rights and obligations is that while rights refer to what we gain from society, obligations refer to what we should do for the society. So this is the basic difference between rights and obligations. Secondly, rights are certain individual entitlements. Say, for example, freedom, liberty. Obligations, on the other hand, are our responsibilities as citizens or individuals of the society. That is our duties which we should perform for the society or for other individuals. Thirdly, rights are for one's self, whereas obligations are mostly for others. So these three are the major differences between rights and obligations. But in spite of these differences, rights and obligations are very closely related with one another. We will now come to that issue. In fact, rights and obligations can be seen as different parts in the social web, which together form the social network or social web. They are opposite or reverse sides of the same coin. Rights and duties or obligations, they are interdependent. To possess a right usually places somebody under an obligation to uphold or respect the rights of the others. For example, if the right to life is meaningful for the individual, then the government is subject to an obligation to maintain public order and ensure personal security. Because if there is no law and order in the society, if the society is chaotic, then the life and liberty of the individual is in danger. An individual can enjoy his right to life or right to liberty only when the government performs its duty or obligation to maintain law and order in the society. In this way, the rights and duties or obligations, they are interdependent. In fact, rights need to be balanced by duties. Rights are what one wants others to do for him or her, whereas duties and obligations are those acts that one should perform for others. When I enjoy a right as an individual or a citizen in the society, I expect that the government or the state will protect my right, will guarantee my right. And the society and other individuals, they expect from me that I will perform my duty or obligation to other individuals in the society so that they can enjoy their rights. Say, for example, one individual has the right to freely move in the street or in the road. Then myself has the duty or obligation to drive safely on that road so that the right of the other individual to walk freely can be guaranteed or enjoyed. In this way, the rights and duties are interdependent. A right comes with an obligation to show respect for the right of others. The obligations that accompany rights are in the form of duties. So, the rights and obligations of individuals can be thought of as rules that each person needs as they relate to other people within the wider human community. People have right to certain basic provisions and services. Meeting these needs places obligations or responsibility on others. Making a human community work or a society to function so that each person can live and develop to their maximum potential can be thought of as a balance between rights and obligations. So, a society to function properly, this balance is very much needed. Life can become smoother if rights and duties go hand in hand and become complementary to each other. So this is the core of the relationship between rights and obligations, that they are not against one another. Rights and obligations are in fact complementary to one another. Now, we have come to the last point of our discussion. Another very important concept is very closely related with this interrelationship between rights and obligations. That is the concept of political obligation vis-a-vis the concept of citizenship. Here again, there are various theories of political obligation. We will not go into the details, but we'll just mention some of the major theories for an understanding of the relationship between rights, obligations, political obligations, and citizenship. Citizenship entails a blend of rights and obligations, the most basic of which is political obligation. Political obligation basically means the duty of the citizens to acknowledge the authority of the state and obey its laws. That is the primary obligation of the citizens. In a democratic society or in a democratic state, as the state guarantees the rights of the individuals through its legal and judicial system, as we have mentioned earlier, similarly, on the other hand, it is the duty and obligation of the citizens to obey the state and to obey the laws of the state. This is the core idea of the concept of political obligation. Now, the primary concern or debate about this concept of political obligation or this issue of obeying the state and obeying the laws of the state is that how far, when, and why an individual is obliged to obey laws and commands of the political authority. This basic question has been raised. The why at all the people should obey the state, or how long they should obey the state. The question has also been raised that what happens if the state does not guarantee the rights of the individual? At what point does the bond of obedience dissolve? Will that bond dissolve at all? Is there a right of the citizens to rebel against and even overthrow such a state by force, the state which does not perform its obligation of guaranteeing the rights of the individual? So these are some basic questions being raised regarding the question of political obligation. And centering these questions, there have emerged different theories of political obligation in political philosophy and political theory. Now, these questions are really very complex, and there are no definite answers which could be universally acceptable. The different theories, I will just mention those theories, have tried to answer these questions differently. Some of the major such theories are: number one, doctrine of force majeure, which means that the people obey the state as the state has the sovereign power and also the power to use force, coercive power, if the citizens do not obey the laws of the state. That means the citizens obey the laws of the state out of fear, out of the penalties which will be bestowed upon them if they do not obey the laws of the state. Second, the divine right theory, which argued that the state or the sovereign power is an agent of the God, so the people should always obey the authority of the state and should never protest against the state. Thirdly, the conservative theory, which argued that not much change is welcome within the process of government, and the people or the citizens should maintain the status quo. Number four, the consent theories or the social contract theories, which argued that as the people entered into a contract and formed the state, so it is an obligation on the part of the people to obey the laws of the state. Next, the idealist theory, which projected the state as an ideal institution, the only institution within which the individual can fully realize all his potentialities. So, they must live within the state and obey the state. Then the Marxist theory of the state, which described the state as an organ of class domination and argued that a state is a class-divided society and the dominated class must protest against the domination of the minority. And lastly, the anarchist theory, which argued that there is no need of the political structure called the state in a society. So these are briefly the various major theories of political obligation, which has tried to answer these basic questions differently according to their positions. To conclude, we can say that rights and obligations, they are interrelated, inseparable, and interdependent. Rights and obligations together make up a whole. To possess a right usually places someone else under an obligation to uphold or respect that right. Obligations do not always fall on the state. Individuals who possess rights must acknowledge the obligations towards the state. Otherwise, civilized life would be impossible. Citizenship, therefore, is a blend of rights and obligations. With these words, we conclude today's discussion. Thank you.